All right, welcome back everyone. So we've got about 8 inches of fresh powder outside here in Flagstaff, so not gonna be taking the bikes out at least for a couple of days. So instead, I thought I would tell you guys a quick story, a little fireside chat about something that has recently happened that also has quite an interesting backstory to it. So very recently I found out some news, and that news is that I am going to be participating in something called the double. So what that means is I have been entered into 2 very prominent long distance races for the same year, which doesn't really sound like that big of a deal, but when I tell you why it's a big deal, I think you'll realize that it is in fact a rather interesting situation that I now find myself in. So I had this whole video recorded that was like 30 minutes long. I was going to tell you the long drawn out backstory, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the links below to some of my journal entries, which will explain kind of the long and storied history that I've have with some of these events so you can get a better picture. But what I will at least do is give you the short abbreviated version. About 15 years ago, I started running what are known as ultramarathons, which is just a fancy way of saying any event or distance or trail, run or race that's longer than a standard marathon. So that could be anything from a 50-kilometer or 31-mile race all the way up to several hundred miles. And from the moment I started running these races, I learned very quickly about several of sort of the premier races that exist in the ultra running world. Specifically, I would say there are probably about a handful, maybe 5 or 6 races that are considered the sort of crown jewels of ultra running, that everyone at some point who gets into this sport wants to do, just because whether it's the landscapes and the aesthetic beauty of the course, or whether it's the sort of long history of that particular race, there are reasons that these races have been elevated to such a high place in the pantheon of ultra running. And 2 of these events specifically are the Western States 100 and the Hardrock 100. Now, these 2 events are similar in that they're both 100-milers. They both exist in the mountains, so you're running on trails in the mountains. But the reason that they're both elevated to this crown jewel status is because of different reasons. So the Western States 100 is very well known and sort of sought after because it is one of the oldest 100-milers in the country, has a very long history, and it sort of represents kind of the birth of very long distance ultra running. But it has also become somewhat of a premier event, so you get a lot of the really fast elite runners that will participate in the event. And so it just draws in a lot of people, and so when you're in this event, you feel like you're a part of history. So it's very attractive to runners, and you know, everyone at some point who's done any of these races is like, someday I want to run Western States. Just kind of like that. It's kind of like the equivalent of, say, like the Boston Marathon would be for people running road marathons. On the other side, you've got the Hardrock 100, and the Hardrock 100 is very different in that it's a lot smaller, so there's only about 150 runners, and it is in the most technical, rugged mountains in the United States. So it's in the high peaks of Colorado, and it goes up to 14,000 feet on the course. So you've got to be in top shape, you've got to be trained. It will absolutely kick your butt. But it is one of the most beautiful courses that exists today, hands down. So a lot of people want to run these events, both of them, more than they can handle. And so what happens is they have to turn a lot of people away. And the way that they've decided to sort of combat this problem is to institute lotteries. So every year, if you've qualified for the race, which means you've run another event, another 100-miler or 50-miler or something that shows that you're capable of actually running that far, you put your name in a lottery and then they have a drawing. And the way the lotteries work are that if it's your first year in the lottery, your odds are very, very small that you'll get selected. But for every year that you don't get in and you reapply, your odds double. So after 2 years, your odds are twice as much, and then 3 years, they're 4 times as much, and then 8 times, and 16, and it keeps going up exponentially. So what that means, in short, is that as long as you keep applying, you will get to run each of these races at some point within about 10 years. And so as soon as I found out about these events, I started putting my name in the lotteries. And the very long story short is that I had terrible luck in these lotteries. For years, even when my odds started creeping up and over 50%, I was still not getting selected. So I just had awful luck. But after 9 years in the lotteries, I finally got to run both events. I ran Western States in 2017 and Hardrock in 2018. And what's crazy is the Western States run, I didn't even know I was going to be running it until 12 hours before the race because I got in off the wait list 12 hours before the start of the race. So it's an entirely separate, wild, and ridiculous story that I'll link below, but it is pretty ridiculous how I got into that race. So I ran both these races. Everything was good. My cup was filled. I was happy. But the way it works is that once you run each race, your lottery counts go back to zero. And so immediately after running them, I started re-entering the lotteries to start building up my odds again, with the thought that, 8-9 years down the line, I might get selected again. Now, if you follow this channel at all, you'll know that every July, I take a motorcycle trip up to Colorado. And the reason I do that is because I volunteer at the Hardrock race. So I ran both these events, one in 2017, one in 2018. I've been adding up my tickets ever since, haven't gotten back into either one. And this year, November, I put my name in both lotteries again. And on lottery selection day, which was just a couple weeks ago, instead of sitting around and kind of following the lotteries on social media, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go and go for a run while the lotteries are happening so I don't have to think about it. So I signed up for a 50K down in Phoenix, drove down, was just in the middle of running this course, having a good old time. And at one point I was coming in on a loop back through like the starting area. And I know the race director quite well for this race, and he gets on the microphone as he sees me coming, and he says, "Hey everyone, I've got an announcement to make. Please, can I have your attention?" So I'm in the middle of a race. I stop. I'm thinking, wow, is the race being shut down, or we have bad weather or something? And he just gets on the microphone and says, "John is going back to Hardrock." And so I found out while running an event that my name had been selected for the Hardrock in the lottery. And so I was ecstatic. I've always wanted to go back to Hardrock a second time. And I started celebrating right there on the course. I was hooting and hollering. All these people were coming up to me, congratulating me, knowing how hard it is to get into this event. And I was just so happy because for the last 5 years, I've been volunteering at Hardrock. I've been, just really committed to this race. And I just really wanted to do it again. And so, I'm full of excitement, and I look over at the race director, and he's still holding the microphone, and he's giving me this kind of deadpan stare, and I'm confused, and he says over the microphone, "I wasn't finished yet, and Western States." So my reaction went from one of utter excitement and pure joy to utter anxiety and terror. So at that moment, I had learned that something very rare had happened to me, and that is that I got into both lotteries the same year. And let me just stress how rare that is. Now, if there are elite runners that are entered into these races through other mechanisms outside of the lottery, and sometimes some of these elite runners will do what's called the double. But for someone to get into both events just serendipitously through the lottery is very rare, and so rare, in fact, that this year of the 400 plus runners that got into Western States and the 150 in Hardrock, there are only 3 of us that are doing both, that got selected for both. And just to give you an idea of my odds to get into Hardrock were 38%. My odds to get into Western State were 14%. My odds to get into both were about 5%. So it was very unlikely that I was going to get selected to both events. And so now here I am. I find myself thinking, crap, I didn't really want this, but I can't say no at this point. I mean, I've got to go in fully committed. And I feel incredibly honored that I was selected for both these events, but I am very scared because they're 3 weeks apart. The closest I've ever done 2 100-mile races is 5 weeks. I did Vermont 100 and Leadville 100 years ago. 5 weeks apart, but I was 8 or 9 years younger then, and it was 2 weeks further apart. So, you know, I'm not a spring chicken. I'm in my mid-40s, and I just found out I've got to run a 100-miler, and then 3 weeks later, another 100-miler, both of which are incredibly difficult. The second one being the harder one. And I'm not sure how to feel other than kind of excited, but also kind of just kind of really nervous and terrified. So that's the update. I wanted to tell you guys this because it means that basically starting now, I have to ridiculously amp up my training game and start running a lot. And I already started this week. I've been going out every day on runs, and I just, you know, it's going to be a lot of hard training for the next 6 months, and which means not as much motorcycle content, a lot more on 2 feet content, but I'm hoping that you guys will take this journey with me. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs with the training. I've got to shed about 10 to 15 pounds, I would say, to get into like perfectly lean ultra running shape. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. So that is the plan. I've got to really think about how I want to run that first race kind of conservatively so that I save enough to run the second race, because the bottom line is, as much as I want to run them both, the second race, the Hardrock, is the one that my heart is really, really connected with. So it's not that I don't want to run Western States, I do, but I don't want to run Western States such that I injure myself or I run so hard that I then take myself out of Hardrock. Hardrock is, for me, the goal race of the year. So what that means is I basically get a joy ride tour of the Western States course at a nice casual pace with some friends, and then 3 weeks later, you know, it's go time at Hardrock. So yeah, wish me luck. The training starts now. With 8 inches of snow outside, I've got to go out and run 10 miles today. So here we go. And I'm excited to share the adventure with all of you and the build-up. For the next 6 months, it's gonna be a lot of hard work and changing my diet a little bit and really just dialing in that training. So a lot of commitment, a lot of willpower. That's all I got. I have a few other videos queued up that I'm working on. I've got another Treks to Nowhere episode, just a bunch of things down the line, but it's going to be a little quiet on the motorcycle front for a little while. The Himalayan is up for the winter. The Trail 125 is still up and operational. We are supposed to get back into the 50s next week, so I might take that out on some fun rides, but they've closed all the forest roads in town. So my playground is closed until April. Boo. Oh. All right, guys, take care, be safe. I will see you in the next video, and hopefully you will see me getting thinner and more fit as the weeks progress. So take care. See you in the next video.